Alright, to start out with, I'm going to say that my name is Madison Ostrowski, and I'm here with Joe Ostrowski, my grandpa, and we will be conducting this interview in his house in Littleton, Colorado. To begin, we start out with where and when were you born?
I was born in Dodge City, Kansas, April 27th, 1947.
What were the names of your parents?
Eris, Emil, and Eldon Ostrowski, or Eldon Baird.
So, how long did you live in Dodge City?
About a week.
And where did you move to?
Colorado Springs, Colorado.
What were the types of jobs that your parents were doing?
Well, my mom was worked for the phone company, an operator, and my dad, who they were divorced right away after I was born, but he was in the Coast Guard.
I see. Can you describe what it was like living in your childhood home?
Well, we went to when we moved to Colorado Springs when I was a week old. We moved to my grandparents' house in Colorado Springs, and I was they actually raised me. My mother had to work all the time, and so she lived at my grandparents' house, but she worked most of the time. And then she got her own little apartment, and my grandma and grandpa just talked her into leaving me with them. So I lived with them until I was 13. My mother got remarried to my stepfather, Wilford Ostrowski, when I was 6.
I see. So, was there any other military presence in your family?
Well, my stepfather, Wilford Ostrowski, he was a Marine in Korea.
I see. So, what was one of your favorite things to do as a kid?
Well, growing up in the 50s like I did, it was playing cowboys and Indians and playing war. Most of the kids that I grew up with, were all children of either World War II vets or Korean vets, and so their dads had always brought home a lot of their helmets and gear from World War II. So we used to play war all the time.
Yeah.
That was our favorite thing. Or cowboys and Indians.
What was it like going to school in Colorado Springs?
It was good. I went to a Catholic school until I was in the 6th grade, and then I went to public school in junior high and high school.
See, what was your favorite subject?
Probably history.
So, what were you doing prior to the war starting, or prior to your awareness of the war?
Well, I was aware of the war. Pretty close. It was. I think I probably became aware of the war in 1963, and they had a ship. The United States had a ship that was captured or attacked by North Vietnam at the time, and that's what they said started the war. But as it turned out, it really didn't happen. It was government made it up, and in a pretense to get over to Vietnam.
I see. Um, so was that you, the ship being attacked, that was your understanding of the United States involvement with Vietnam, or?
Right.
Okay. So, before we get into actually being in Vietnam, I want to ask, what is your official title or rank when you were in the military?
Well, I was an E5 was the highest rank I got to, which is a E5 as a sergeant in the Marine Corps.
I see. So, what events led you to joining the military?
Well, I went to, I was going to college at the time at Colorado College, and I went to spring break down in Mexico, down to Mazatlan with some of my friends, and I had such a good time that I called my mom and I told her that I was going to stay down there and I'd go to summer school and make up that semester that I dropped out. We were on quarters. And it was the last quarter, so I told her I'd just go to summer school and make up that quarter. And so I did, but back in that time, that was in '66. And I got a draft notice that I had to report, not a draft notice, but a physical notice that I had to come back and take a physical because the school back then had turned in within a day or two after I didn't show up for class. They dropped out. The school turned in my notice that I was eligible for the draft. So I called my mom and I told her, well, I'll come back and I'll get in and take my physical. So I came back from Mexico and I went down and took my physical. I came up to Denver to take my physical, and I just thought that, well, my grandpa, he was in World War I, and my dad or my stepdad was in World War II, and my dad. So it was just my turn to go, and I didn't think twice about it, so I went down and enlisted in the Marine Corps. And I did that with a delay, so I had like a 6-month delay before I had to go in. And so it was 6 months prior to October 13th of 1966 that I enlisted.
Wow. So how did your family feel about you enlisting?
Well, most families are worried. I mean, they're scared for their children because they're going off to war, but they'd all been there and they knew that it was something that people had to do for our liberties that we have in the United States, so they never thought much about it. They were all for it,
Mm-hmm.
supported me in my decision, and that's about it.
Where was boot camp?
October 13th was on a Friday, and I flew from Colorado Springs to Denver, and from Denver to San Diego. Went to boot camp 13 weeks in San Diego.
Do you recall the name of your drill sergeant?
No,
All right.
had 4 or 5 of them.
What was the hardest part about boot camp?
Well, boot camp is there to it's very physical to get you in really good physical conditioning, but it's also there to break down any of your pre-consisting ideas of what life was like, and to teach you that in the Marine Corps is to teach you that your survival depends on your fellow Marine, and it's to teach you that oneness, that bonding with your people that you're in the service with. And I mean, none of it was, I really didn't mind it too much. I kind of enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm.
I was in pretty good shape, so the physical part of it wasn't too bad. It was running, a lot of running,
Mm-hmm.
heavy weights, backpack, and but you got to remember, I've been playing at it for my whole life
Mm-hmm.
as a child. So anyway, that's.
All right. So what was the unit that you were a part of?
Well, when I my platoon in boot camp, this only for 12 weeks, was 1138, and that was the platoon in boot camp that I was part of. And then after that 12 weeks, you get assigned to school,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to. I came home. Let's see. I came home for, I think, 30 days in December of that year, right before Christmas. I got to come home for Christmas, and so I was off for 30 days from December to January, and then I went back and I went to school, and you had, in boot camp, one of the things you have to do is take a lot of tests. You have to take so they can find out what your aptitude, what you have,
Mm-hmm.
what job would suit you the best, physically and mentally, what you're capable of doing.
Mm-hmm.
And the school that I went to was artillery school, and I was actually as a forward observer. So when I went to school, they taught me how to read a compass and how to coordinates on a map, all that kind of stuff, how to pick out different things on.
All right. So what did you do between the time that you graduated from the Marine Corps and when you had to be deployed?
Well, when you're done with your school, then you go back for another 8 weeks. I think school was like 8 weeks, or maybe not, maybe 8 weeks. I can't remember, 6 weeks, something like that. And then you go back for another 4 to 6 weeks to ITR, which is infantry training. So what that is you train for things that you didn't use in boot camp, like rifles. You qualified, and you had shooting qualification, but you didn't use anything like machine guns or throw hand grenades or shoot recoilless rifles or anything like that. And ITR, that's infantry training. That's where you do the actual training with machine guns and that kind of thing, and learning fields of fire and how to set up different kinds of ambushes and things like that. And then when I got done with it, I went, then you receive your orders and where you're going to go next after ITR, and you go to what's called staging. And I was picked to go to Vietnam. Most of the guys were, some weren't, but most of them were. And you go to staging, and staging is another 4 weeks of intense infantry training, and staging is getting you ready to go to Vietnam. So you do, you see how to identify. They teach you, it's a school, and they teach you. I remember one of the things that was kind of fun was, sort of fun, it was POW camp, and you had to escape from a POW camp. Well, these guys were, and you have to remember, when I went, it was pretty strict. I mean, it was the guys were, the guards that were there were Marines that had come back from Vietnam, and they realized that their importance was to keep you alive if you got captured. And so their main focus is to escape, and name, rank, and serial number, and then escape. And you had like 2 days or something like that to get out of. Hey, I think the state it was like 3-day class or 4-day class, and you had 3 or 4 days to escape, and then elude them and get back to your base camp. And so that was kind of fun. And then let's see. I guess that was about it as far as staging goes. They teach you about the kind of traps and booby traps and IEDs they're called now, but they teach you about what to watch for, how to if you have a just different position when you go out into the field. If you're running point, you have to look for wires and traps and different kinds of things like that, and they teach you all those things in staging and also in ITR. And then I got to come home again before I left for Vietnam. I came home for, I think, maybe a week or 3 or 4 days or so before I went, before I left to go overseas.
And when did you leave?
I left, let's see, May of 1966. No, that's not right. I left, actually, it was in May, but it must have been 67. Because I came home June of 68. And I was there for 13 months.
So where did they send you to? Like, which part of Vietnam were you sent to?
Well, when I first went over, I flew over. This is kind of neat. We flew over to Hawaii, and we were there for a day and a half, a couple days, and then we went from there to the Philippines, Wake Island, and then we were on Continental Airlines, so we had stewardesses, and just like flying to San Diego. I mean, just like any other flight to Mexico, it was on Continental Airlines, which is kind of neat. And then of course, when you first get there, we landed in Da Nang, and they have to assign you to a company and a area,
Mm-hmm.
and that took them 3 or 4 days, and they have to have somebody from that company or from that outfit come and pick you up in a truck so they can take you down to. And of course, at that time, you're not issued weapons or anything, so. When I first got there, I thought, well, God, the first thing they're going to do is hand me a rifle. I'm in a war zone, but they didn't, and I didn't get a rifle right away till they came and picked me up like 3 days later. I didn't know what to expect, and there was a bunch of us, probably 8 or 9 of us. And they put us on a Army deuce and a half, and then took us to where we were going, which was Chulai, which was south of Da Nang. I don't know how far, maybe 50 miles, 60 miles. And at the time, I didn't know, but Chulai was they'd had a bunch of really big battles there just a week or two before I got there, or 3 weeks before I got there, so it was a pretty hot area. And I was in the first Marine Division, 13th Marines, 4th Battalion, and that's when initially I was assigned to one battery, Lima Battery, and it was a battery of 155 self-propelled howitzers, and so they're like a tank kind of, and that's where I ended up going first.
So, are these locations next to the Ho Chi Minh Trail?
No.
No?
No, the Ho Chi Minh Trail is actually in Cambodia, and it's on the other side. The one I was always, well, I did go to the Ashaw Valley for a while, but not very long. I was always right along the coast, and we were in July for probably 2 months in that area, and then we went from there to Ashaw Valley,
Mm-hmm.
and then we went from there to Way, outside of Way. And so each, they'd move you around, and with me, I was in and out. I'd go out with, I was a forward observer, so I'd go out with the infantry whenever Charlie Company or Delta or whatever company was going out on operations, and I'd go out with different infantry battalions or infantry companies or squads or platoons or whatever, and then I'd go with different in the field with different ones.
Mm-hmm.
So I never was really, I usually always go back to the battery, to Lima Battery, and stay there until I was assigned to the next
Mm-hmm.
group to go out at, so.
Can you explain what your first patrols were like?
Well, you got to remember, the thing is, as a child, as children, I was always played a lot of sports, and the best way I've got of describing it is in wrestling or football or whatever it is, you always have person, your opponent, you have a fear. You know, there's a fear of the unknown. You don't know what's going to happen. Like in wrestling, you don't know who you're going to wrestle, and you don't know if you're going to get hurt or what's going to happen. And you have to learn, and that's what teaching sports is good for, is because it teaches you to do away with that fear. Most of, what you learn, what you're taught, and what how good you get at it, how hard you work at it, gives you a feeling of understanding what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the same in the military. When you first go out, you're really, when I first got there, I was afraid just like everybody else. I mean, you have a lot of fear. Fear like you've never had before, because you're not playing sports, you're playing probably the ultimate sport, which is you against someone else, and you're both trying to kill each other. And so that you have to rise. You go one of two ways, and that's in the military and in war. You either learn to conquer your fear, or you let your fear subside and it goes inside of you, and or you live surrounded by fear and you're afraid of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And you're constantly afraid. Now the fellow buddies that you're with, you learn to trust them and watch out for them and to take care of them, and they learn to do the same for you. So that helps to subside any fear that you have personally eventually. But it's not something that happens right away. It's something that kind of occurs over a period of maybe a month or 6 weeks. And when I first got there, it was I didn't go out much. They don't send the new guys into the field right away, because you couldn't survive, because it was too hot. I mean, it was middle of the summer. It was close to being the middle of the summer, and it was 100 degrees and 99% of humidity. So the jungle is really that's the biggest enemy that you have at first, and all you can do is you can't get too far away from the water buffalo, they used to call them, because you're drinking water all the time. Mm-hmm. And we used to take these salt tablets and take this other stuff for malaria, and you stay in base, so at night you're doing guard duty on the perimeter and that kind of thing. And then eventually you start going out on LPs. Those are listening posts. So you're just going out maybe 100, 200, 300 feet in front of the wire, and you stay there all night on a listening post, listening to see if anybody's coming in to attack the base. And so you do those things like that, and then you exercise a lot. They had 4 or 5 of us new guys exercising all the time in the heat, and in that kind of getting used to it. And after 8 weeks, 2 months, you start getting pretty used to it, where it doesn't bother you anymore, and the heat becomes your friend. Mm-hmm. Because you're fighting against someone that lives in that heat all their life. They don't know anything else. They've never seen cool, so so
it's a bit different from
Colorado. It gets bone-chilling cold in the monsoon season. I mean, it's really cold because it's raining. It rains 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Just total rain all the time. So everything's wet, nothing's dry, your boots are wet, your shorts are wet, everything, you're sopped. And then temperature dips down to maybe even 60. I don't know how cold it got really, but it felt like it was really cold. And it was miserable. I mean, it was, there was nowhere you could dry off. And the monsoons, they just keep coming and coming, and you still got to go out into the field. I mean, you're still on ambushes, and you go out in to confront the enemy to find them. And they're waiting for you, or you're there waiting for them, and it's just raining like you've never seen. The rain is so hard that it's just and the thing about Vietnam was, by far and away, it was probably the most beautiful place that I've ever seen in my life. I mean, if it was a picture and you could just look at it, it was phenomenal, and the beauty was stark. It was so beautiful. The movements of and the animals. And for 2 months, one of the things we did was we hunted these 2 Bengal tigers. I mean, that's what we were doing. Was we went into the jungle and we were hunting these tigers, because over there the tigers they'd gotten used to killing or taking dead. They'd eat the dead. So whether it was, most of the time it wasn't ever us, but it was either the Vietnamese or the Viet Cong or the NVA that were left lying, and it was an easy prey for them, so they'd eat them. So they became used to eating human flesh, and they didn't want anything else. And so they got to be where they'd go into the rice paddies and grab Vietnamese out of the rice paddy and take them over and eat them. And so they were man eaters. Well, it's a funny thing. I mean, a regular little house cat, you think, well, he can be on the ground, and he's maybe, I don't know, 14 inches tall, and he can jump up on the back of a chair that's 3 feet up in the.
Yeah.
Well, a cat, like a tiger, can do the same thing. He's 4 foot tall, so he can jump on top of something, sits right there and jump on something that's 16, 18 feet tall. So just with one little leap, just jump right up. I mean, they're incredibly strong, and they can run, and they move in the jungle so quick that you can't. And the thing is, the guys have been trying to shoot them. The helicopter pilots and gunners would see them forever. And then every time they'd come, we were on a little hill, and they came down below the hill right where we were, and we had maybe 40 guys up on top that hill, and we see these tigers, and everybody's running to the edge of the wire, and we're shooting at these tigers, and nothing. It's like they didn't even feel it, and everybody was missing. I mean, so anyway, that was kind of a fun part. I mean, what happened was, we were on patrol one time, and we were out there, and it was kind of a clearing. It was an area where they dropped a bunch of Agent Orange, and that Agent Orange pretty much destroyed all the jungle and made it into. And it was great. I mean, personally, I think Agent Orange was one of the best things the government ever did.
And what is Agent Orange?
Agent Orange is a defoliant, and that there's a lot of people now that are suffering from it. Guys that are dying from it, and a lot of cancers are caused from it. But when you look back at it, it was a blessing, because it was the difference between fighting a battle that was 1 foot or 2 foot away from you to a battle that was 2 blocks away from you. In other words, you'd be able to see out there, and you'd see the enemy. Whereas when it's a jungle, you can run right into the enemy right next to the jungle, and never see them before you're on them. And so that's why it was such a blessing, is because it pushed back that jungle, and you could actually maneuver in it and see around in it.
I see.
And we, I was in an area that had been defoliated with Agent Orange, and I used to carry these. My job was I loved law rockets. Law rocket was a really neat thing. And so I usually carried 3 or 4 of them. And we spotted one of those tigers taking off across this area that had been defoliated. So I grabbed that law rocket and I shot in front of him. I aimed pretty far in front with that law rocket because it's slow moving. It's not like like a bullet. It doesn't go right. It's a little bit slower. So I led him probably 15 foot. He was running full blast, maybe even further than that. And actually he ran right into, the round hit probably 3 feet in front of him, maybe 4 foot in front of him. And it actually exploded. Well, there's a lot of shrapnel in a law rocket. And it exploded and it killed him. It hit him in the head and shrapnel. So we got him, and first thing we did was we gutted him out, skinned him, and inside of his pelt, if you ever realize, if you ever have to give a cat a shot, like a veterinarian shot, well, I never knew it until one time. Well, this is the first time I ever knew how tough their skin is. Cats have really, really tough skin. Like when you give just a domestic house cat a shot, I had to do that one time up in Homer. We had a cat, and I had to give him a shot. We used to get the shots down at the drugstore, and you got to kind of bear down and turn on it. Well, what happened was this cat, when we skinned him, he had M16 rounds right in his skin, hundreds of them. So we'd been hitting him, everybody had been shooting him, but nothing had penetrated. The skin was so tough.
Wow.
That it was just, it was amazing.
That's crazy.
And so anyway, I sent it back here and got it mounted and put into a carpet, big tiger mounting, and gave it to the CEO in our company that I was in at the time. And I noticed at one time I saw it in its 1st Marine Division now, and I saw the headquarters, and I think it was General Schwarzkopf in Iran when they first went in there with the first Iran war, or Iraq war, the first one. It was on the back wall of the Supreme Commander was General Schwarzkopf, and it was on the wall of the 1st Marine Division's place. So it's kind of neat. It's still in the...
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, very cool.
So, did you ever collaborate with any other companies from different countries?
Oh yeah. I was out with, because I was an FO, I went out with anybody that was around, and they sent me out with a lot of mercenaries, there was a group of Australians and South Africans. I was with them for probably 2-3 weeks, and they were great guys. They were probably the most fun of all was the Australians. The Australian guy, they were really neat. I liked them a lot. And then I also went out with ROKS, which is the Korean Marines, and they're probably the far and away. You got to think about war. What war is. And it's just like sports. When you're wrestling or boxing or whatever it is, if you can make the other person afraid of you, if they're afraid to go out and face you a little bit, so they got a little bit of fear to face you, it gives you an edge up. And in war, it's the same thing. If you can make the enemy a little bit afraid of you, and that's where the Marine Corps has always been. They make people afraid of them. And but war is a whole different thing. It's very violent, and the way that you become afraid is what they do to people that they capture or when they take over, and so those kind of things make you very afraid, and the
Kind of needed quiet space.
yeah.
Back here.
All right, I'm ready. Are you ready?
Yep. So
Anyway,
you were talking
but
about the.
So let's talk about this for a second. So war, that's what war is, and the one that can make the other warrior afraid of them, they have the upper hand. And so that's what happens when you see these pictures or you hear stories, and everything that you hear and see in is nothing. You can't understand it unless you're there in it. War is it's a reality, and that's what PTSD is. Is you become a warrior and you go into the warrior mindset, which means you're there to kill other human beings. So you're on this greatest path that you could ever imagine. I mean, when it's you against other humans and they're there to kill you, it's the ultimate competition, the ultimate sport. And you either do one of two things. Fear takes you over your whole being, or you're able to calm your fear. And I was actually, what happened to me was we were on patrol and we got hit with 144 rockets. They're big rockets that the Vietnamese the Viet Cong and the NVA used to shoot at us. And these rockets went off, and my best friend, he was shot down, or he went down, and I went over to grab him and to see whether he was hurt, see what was wrong. And I got over there, and he was blowing up pretty bad. His hand was gone, part of his arm, and so I put a tourniquet on that. And I started calling for a corpsman, but I couldn't find any other wounds on him that were really bad. There was a lot of superficial shrapnel and stuff like that, but nothing bad. And he was seriously injured. And so I sat there and I put his head in my lap, and I remember running my hand over his head, comforting him, and I came on. He had his skull in the back of his head. There was a big piece of shrapnel sticking out of his head. So I mean, who knows how big it was? But he was. As soon as I saw that, I knew he was gone. And I sat there, and then the corpsman came over, and he was a new guy. He'd only been there maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and he in a situation like that, you don't know what to do. I mean, unless you can keep your focus, you don't focus on anything else. You focus on your protection and what you're doing at that time, and corpsmen, the way they work is they focus on the person they're trying to heal, trying to find out what's wrong with them, and keep, they do phenomenal things. I mean, they go right after if you got somebody that's got a pumper and they're really bleeding bad and it's squirting out blood. I've seen them just take a knife and just rip them open and go in there and pinch off that artery right there. Just pinch it off they got these clamps that they put on them like scissors that squeeze down, and they'll put those scissors on them, and then they throw them on a helicopter and send them in to get back to the medical doctors, you know, and they fix it up. But anyway, and so I'm sitting there and I'm holding that friend of mine, Wayne, and I'm looking at him, and I come to the realization that he really hadn't gone anywhere. I mean, you know, he didn't leave me. His body was still there, and in a year from there, his body would still be there. It would become part of the earth. It would rot and go into the earth and become part of the earth again. And his soul was what wasn't there. And I began realizing that his soul was all around me and everything that was going on. You know, in war, everything slows down to a really funny time. It's like being in a fight. When you're in a fight, it slows down. Everything kind of takes on a different perspective. And that's what happens in war, is that your reality that you've been trained, that you've been played at since you were a child, 2 years old, is the reality of being here in the United States, being raised here in the United States, doing all the things, going to the mall, playing basketball, playing softball, doing all the things that you do, and your mom and your dad and your family gathered around, that becomes your reality, and that's what you expect. That is your reality. Those things are real to you, and there's nothing outside of those, I mean, that you focus on. That's your whole reality. But when you go to war, you find out that there's another reality. I mean, and that reality is as true as the reality of being home with your family, and we're going to Thanksgiving next week, you know. I mean, that's the reality that we live in today. But the reality in war is a whole lot different than that. It's not the same, and that's the problem that's what causes PTSD, is you get stuck in that reality. That is your reality. It becomes, you know, the Vietnamese, they'd lived with this all of their lives, and their fathers had lived with it with the French. They'd lived in this war reality all the time. And that was their reality. They didn't have a safe reality. It's like Kosovo, or over in it doesn't matter, Libya, or over in Lebanon right now. Those people that are living in that are in a war reality, and any break from that and moving them into an area like here, home, would be a total shock for their system, and they couldn't adjust to it. And that's the problem with PTSD, is that when you move from that war zone into a neutral zone where you've been your whole life, you have a break in your reality there, because both of them are just as real. The war reality is very much as real as the civilian reality that you grew up as a child in. They're both realities, and it takes time to kind of merge that back together. You know, it's an important thing. You know, I think you know, when I came back, they didn't call it PTSD then, but I had it pretty bad for a while, because I couldn't adjust back to this reality. In fact, I remember telling Grandma one time, I said, you know, it doesn't matter whether we live or die, honey. I mean, we're not going anywhere. We've always been here, and we'll be here for 1,000 more years, 10,000 years. We'll always be here. Our bodies don't go anywhere. They just go back into the earth and become bodies again. I mean, you know. But anyway, and I can remember I had this full beard, and I took this match and I lit myself on fire. And I told Grandma, I said, you know, I'll show you. I'll burn myself up. I'll die, and then you'll see that I'm here. I'm never going anywhere. I'll be right here with you. And I lit myself on fire. Well, the boys were, you know, your dads were asleep in their beds, and they were babies, you know, young, 6, 7, 8 years old. And so Grandma, you know, immediately she thought, well, this isn't right. Something's not right here. And so she called the mental hospital. And they took me into the mental hospital. Well, I remember sitting there and I realized I knew where I was. I was in a reality of war.
Mhm.
And death doesn't mean a whole lot to you.
Mhm.
You know, you're not. It didn't to me anyway.
Yeah.
You know, I in fact I didn't really expect to come home until maybe the last month that I was going to be there, and I thought, well, maybe I'll come home. And then when I got home, I didn't really know where I was. I mean, I think I got home. I got home the day they shot Kennedy. When he was running for president, and I can remember it was close to the 4th of July, so we went to DU. Used to have a football field and a stadium. We went there because they had a fireworks show there. Well, I mean, you know, I just left. I'd been out for maybe a week, 2 weeks, something like that. I went to the 4th of July at the to watch the fireworks, you know. And I'm sitting there and everybody's laughing, and we had a beer, and all at once they set off one of those rockets, you know, and I just jumped immediately, went down underneath the seats of the bleachers, and I was back in,
Mhm.
you know, and that's the way it was. Well, when I got to the mental hospital, and you know, people can talk to you all when you have one person talking one reality and somebody else is living in another reality, they don't meet. Those two don't emerge. You have to have somebody that knows the reality that you're in to be able to draw you out of it and back into the reality where you should be. And I can remember I'm sitting in the mental hospital, and I was up in Alaska, and I looking out out this window, and I see that it's just freshly fallen snow. I mean, and we got about 2 foot that day, that night. It snowed about 2 foot or a little more maybe. And there's a park across from the hospital, and there's this young man and his girlfriend, and they're running through the snow, and they got all their coats and winter clothes on, and they're laughing and playing in the snow, and Gutty tackles her, and she falls down and rolls down the hill, and and all at once, just like that, in my mind, it said, I looked at him and I saw him, and I said, that's the reality that I'm here for. And just like that, I was sucked back in to the reality I was when I was a child. And everything else, I could see war, I could see where I was, and I could see the reality that I was at 5 minutes before.
Mhm.
But I saw that man and that woman laughing and holding each other and playing, and realizing that's the reality that I came here for, and that's the reality that I want. And really, since that time, I went to the head psychiatrist that day, and I told him, I'm fine, I'm cured, no problems, I need to go. He said, okay. And so he let me out the next day. And I went back with Grandma and the boys and my kids.
Mhm.
and really I've never had a problem since then.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I worked at the hospice, the VA hospice, for 3 or 4 years. And I saw a lot of guys that had come back, and that's one of the problems, is the way they end up fighting PTSD when you're left on your own.
Mm-hmm.
Is alcohol, because the alcohol smooths all those sharp edges. The things that you did over there when you were in that war mind were things that people here really don't understand. And so so you're trying to fight between the two, and the way that it smooths over the edges so you don't really care is alcohol or drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the things that change. There again, it's something that changes your perspective of reality, of the reality of being a responsible dad or responsible mom, and raising your kids, or having a job and taking their responsibility seriously, or being a warrior on a battlefield and taking that reality seriously. And
Mm-hmm.
drugs and alcohol change that reality. And I'm not saying that it's a false reality.
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying it's a different reality, and that reality is not the same reality that you have to produce in this world.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so.
That makes sense. So we're gonna backtrack a little bit.
Okay.
When you were talking about your friend Wayne,
Mm-hmm.
that was the man whose name I
Right.
Esther sketched on the
Right.
memorial in DC.
Mm-hmm.
So how did the two of you meet?
Well, we were in the same. He was actually he commanded one of those self-propelled 105 howitzers. It was his, and he was the chief of that gun. And then me being an FO, I'd go out, and we lived together. We were assigned together in the same bunker, so we became friends because we were like roommates. And that's how we became friends. And he was a surfer from California, and back in that day, 1968, 67, that was kind of a neat thing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, me being from Colorado, we always thought surfers were cool. Until I met him, and then I found out they weren't. But anyway, that's how we met. And then his girlfriend was the Playmate of the Month in Playboy, and so she sent her picture to all of the cover to all the guys and signed their names, and it was pretty phenomenal.
Yeah.
So we were friends anyway.
So, what is that your most fondest memory of him, or what's
Yeah,
your...
I remember one time we were smoking pot, and we were in the bunker at night. And the thing about it is, you know, in that warrior mindset again, the Vietnamese, Viet Cong, North Vietnamese, they used marijuana as to take care of that fear that they had.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they were afraid just like we were, but they'd get high enough on pot and they didn't care, so they'd lose that fear. So that's
Mm-hmm.
one way of losing that fear. And in order to fight them, a lot of times, you had to know where their mind were, what they were thinking and what they were doing and what was going on. I mean, they would attack a fortified position of one of us with wire and concertina wire and claymores, and they knew there was no way to survive, but they didn't really care because they'd get really high on pot, and then they'd have these, they were called sapper charges, and they would have like it was like a mini bomb that they could throw, big, way more powerful than a grenade. So it was like a vest, that they wear today, and they'd take that thing and come into a compound and throw it, try to get the CO, the commanding officer's tent, or try to get something. If we had tanks parked in there overnight or whatever happened, they'd try to get those kind of things. And the way they'd do that is they'd sit down and they'd smoke pot to overcome the fear that they had to do it. So there again, here we are back to the reality. That reality isn't the reality that I can tell you here in this room right now. That's not the reality we're in. But it doesn't change the fact that it's a true reality. And it's actually something that is there, feasible. You can put your finger on it, you can feel it. It's a reality. And so anyway, one time we were high on pot and we had been smoking in the bunker. We were not on duty or something that night or whatever, and Wayne started laughing. God, he just rolling, and he rolled out of the top bunk, and he's laughing so hard. And I said, "What the hell are you laughing at?" He said, "Well, don't you see them, Joe? They're right there. Look, right there. You see them? See them?" I said, "I don't see anything. What the hell are you pointing at?" He says, "Look at those little tiny pink elephants. There's 3 of them, and they're crossing the floor on the bunker." And he just, God, he's rolling. He's laughing so hard. He's just having such a great time. And at the time, and I said, "No, I missed them. I must have looked away." But anyway, those are the the stuff that happens.
Yeah.
And that's when we became friends.
Yeah.
But we were safe with each other. We didn't have there wasn't a lot of. And the problem with my job was that one day I'd be going out with certain guys, the next day I'd go out with another group, the next day I'd go out with the Korean Rocks. So I never was with a lot of different. I went out with a lot of different infantry companies, and I'd see the same guys over and over, but I wasn't like with them all the time.
You didn't build a certain relationship.
I
with
did.
them.
I did. But it wasn't the same as having. If I was assigned to one platoon or one group, so that was a little different in my situation than most.
So, did you ever get injured during your time in Vietnam?
Yeah, I got shot. It was during the monsoon season, like I was telling you about, in the rain. And we were out on patrol, and I was on point, so I was the first one out. And it was raining really, really hard. We were coming back. We'd been on an ambush, set up an ambush out in the boonies there, and we were coming back from that ambush. Didn't see anything. And you never want to use the same trails in and out. You want to try and change them up, but there's certain ways that they know where you're at a certain compound, and there's only so many ways to get back and forth to that area. So you have to beware that they can be setting up an ambush for you when you're coming back through. And some days you make it back fine and nothing happens. Probably 4 out of 5 times you make it back with nothing. But every once in a while you hit that combination where the old spin of the wheel, and you're right where they set up their ambush. And so what we did was, I walked right into it, and I was point, and you couldn't see anything. It was a jungle, and the first thing I knew was that I ran into something hard, and and then I heard this funny sound. It wasn't like a rifle. It was kind of a pop.
Okay.
And I realized that I had run into a rifle barrel of an AK-47, and so anyway, I got shot, but I didn't feel it, and it wasn't anything serious right then and there like it would have been. So we never realized what it was until after the battle was over. So all hell broke loose, and probably 15, 20 minutes we were in I think there was probably 16 of us, the squad, and maybe 19, 20 of them. And so it was a pretty serious ambush. And really it came out pretty good for us. It didn't come out so good for them. But anyway, after it was all over, I got to looking and I kind of figured I got shot, so I looked down there and hell, sure enough. And so they flew me out of there on a medevac, called it a medevac, and didn't hurt, didn't bother me really too much. And what happened was that Viet Cong had been sitting there all night waiting for us to come back on that ambush, come back from ours, and he'd been sitting there and he'd been holding his rifle up, been sitting on the ground holding his rifle, and that rifle barrel and his magazine had gotten wet, and the powder in that round had seeped down around somehow gotten around the bullet, and his powder had gotten wet inside the casing, and so the round was a dummy round. I had it happen to me once too, just going through rice paddy in a river, and I got my magazines wet, and I got one of those bullets, and and with mine it didn't even make it out to the end of the barrel, but I knew when I heard it, and that's the same thing as when I heard his go off, that it wasn't really a full charge, and so what it did is it only went inside of me maybe an inch or 2 inch and didn't do any real serious damage, and they flew me out to the USS Hope, which was the hospital ship out in the Gulf, and it was a Red Cross ship it's like a hospital. It was a hospital ship, and they patched me up, and they sent me back. I was there for about a week or 2 weeks, and then they sent me right back into combat, because my MOS, that's my job, forward observer, was really needed. I mean, they didn't have very many of us. In fact, during Way, which is the big battle that I was in, that I was the only one they had for 2 or 3 days. There are a few officers. I mean, officers are mostly fire direction control guys, and they can also be forward observers. But there aren't a lot of us, and so, when they had to send me back pretty quick, and I was fine coming back. I didn't have a problem.
And you pointed at your right hip. Was that where you got shot, or?
No, actually right above right here.
Okay.
Right, about middle, a little bit on the right side, but.
Around that area?
Uh-huh.
I see. So, were you able to write any letters back home?
Where what?
Write any letters for back home?
Oh yeah, I wrote letters all the time. Yeah.
And who did they go to mostly?
Well, my mom and my grandma and grandpa. I've got a letter I can show you sometime if you want to see them.
Definitely. What type of news would you get about what was happening back home?
Oh, nothing really, not much. I didn't know. We did have the radio, and we had the Marine Corps put out they had a radio station, so we kept up pretty much with all the new songs and music, which was pretty cool. I like that. And we had a lot of new music, and we knew there was a lot of anti-war stuff going on, because when I first went in, there wasn't a lot of it happening.
Mhm.
But in the year or so after I was in, or been over there, it was all over. I mean, it was
Mhm.
all over the news, and the thing was, like that war. I mean, it wasn't run. They didn't allow the big problem. The big problem with Vietnam and Korea was they didn't let the warriors, the generals, run the war. The politicians ran the war.
Yeah.
And whenever that happens, it doesn't go well for us. If you let the warriors run the war, then we win. And it would have been easy. Vietnam it'd be like no different than actually when Schwarzkopf came in from Kuwait. They took that shit in probably a year and a half. We'd have captured all of Vietnam, and North Vietnam would have been ours too. But they didn't let us go into. Well, initially they never let us go in officially into North Vietnam.
I see. So, when were you able to come back home?
I came back home on.
Are you,
I think it was in June of 1968, the day they shot Bobby Kennedy.
and what was that experience like for you?
It was pretty rough. One of the saddest things is the support for the war, and liberals, they have really very little understanding of, with me. I mean, the way I looked at it was, my country called on me, and I went to war, and I didn't question it. And that's the way that my dad was, and my grandpa was, and I was called on to protect America and the liberties that we have. And one of the things, about Vietnam that is same thing they do now. If you can keep a fight from coming to your backyard or to your house by going over to somebody else's house and fighting that war there, and letting everybody know how prepared you are and how well you fight, then that fear that we were talking about, nobody's going to attack you. They're not going to come to your house.
Yeah.
And that's one of the problems with Vietnam, was that I understand it. I mean, when I went to college, when I came back, I went to college, and a lot of those kids had a lot of fear because of the press, and that's the thing that was the worst of everything, was how distorted the press was, because every night on the news they'd show somebody getting shot, somebody dying, they'd show somebody bleeding out. Well, when you're in this reality, not in the war reality, but back home in the States reality, and you're sitting there and you're watching somebody 18, 19 years old bleed to death on a battlefield, or you see some Vietnamese get assassinated or shot, you judge it as being wrong, because your mindset is in a civilian, you don't want to, you don't want to see your fellow classmates shot and killed, and here they are on the battlefield dying, and so you don't support that. You withdraw And the reason you withdraw it is because you withdraw it because you're not seeing the whole picture. You're only seeing what your reality allows you to see.
Mm-hmm.
You're not seeing, the reality is, let's keep these guys from coming over here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you're fighting bad guys, you think that they wouldn't want to come here?
Yeah.
That's foolish. They would. That would be the first thing they'd like to do. But anyway, that was the problem when we came back, was that the news had changed the perspective of, and the Vietnam. You pick these wars. I mean, they picked Vietnam and they picked Korea to stop communism. That's what it was supposed to be doing. Stop it from taking over the peninsula. Well, in truth, I mean, me sitting here telling you this, communism to those people was the best form of government they could have had to Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is because they were uneducated. They were peasants. All they liked to do, and not that, I mean, it's a good thing, is get up in the morning, get their tea, have their rice, go out and work for 10, 12 hours a day in the rice paddy. And they loved it. They enjoyed it. It's the beauty of working with nature, of harvesting that food that was food for them, food for their neighbors, food for Saigon, food for Da Nang. They were creating something there. And that was the gift of their giving, was the communism that controlled that would control that. But what you had instead was illegal thugs running the government. People that were, the DMs they were like gangsters and mafioso in control of the people. Well, the people could see through that and saw how they were, so they're not going to, they're not going to support that.
Mm-hmm.
The United States decided they'd support it, and that was probably where they went wrong.
Yeah.
If they could have gotten in a good government in power, or the people could have gotten a good government in power, it would have been much better off. But the people knew, basically, they wanted freedom, they wanted liberty because they'd heard about it. Mm-hmm. Not because they had a constitution, but because they'd heard about liberty. But they didn't know how to get it, they weren't educated enough to
They thought they were
understand
getting it from communism?
Huh?
They were going to get their freedom,
well,
their liberty from
they were
communism?
forced. I mean,
Okay.
they were colonial. They were taken over by France, and France had the reason France wanted Vietnam so bad. It used to be called French Indochina, and the reason they wanted it was because of the rubber. Michelin tires.
Mm-hmm.
Michelin was the biggest rubber producing company in the world, and they had a corner on rubber. And Vietnam is where they got their rubber. So it was the French fought, I don't know how long, to try and keep them, but they never could defeat them. And so they couldn't defeat them because they didn't have the will to defeat them. You've got to have a reason and a will. In an industrial complex like Michelin or a rubber company, or an oil company or any other, isn't reason enough for people to win a war. The people that are on the ground, the people that live there, the people that are actually the ones that have a dog in the hunt are the ones that are going to win. And so the United States, you had the war being run from the Johnson White House. And actually it started with Kennedy. Everybody makes Kennedy to be this great guy, but I never looked at him quite the same, because he kind of started moving into Vietnam in his day. And it was the wrong place, the wrong battle. On the other hand, you look at Korea. Same thing there, but a good form of government finally got established. Now South Korea is the 5th largest economy on earth. So,
Okay. So, how did you meet Grandma?
Well, when I got back, I went to, you used to have this thing called college days up at Fort Collins in the spring. And every year, they'd have these college days. Well, I came back in June of '68, and I went back to college, and I was going to school up at Colorado Mountain College, and we decided to go down to Fort Collins for college days, and it was fun. It was, you got to remember, every 3-2 beer was legal for 18-year-olds to drink, and so they had these 3-2 bars that were where they had bands and music. The only people in there were people 18 to 21, because the 21-year-olds had their own places because they could drink hard liquor.
Mm-hmm.
So Fort Collins shut down the whole city during college days, and they had beer kegs out in the street and bands all over the place. And it was fun. So we went to college days, and I was walking down I was in the bar, and I was walking by, and this gal comes over and grabs me by the hand, and she says, "I've got somebody that you've got to meet." And she took me by the hand and drugged me over and introduced me to Grandma. So I sat down and we talked, and then we went for a walk around Fort Collins, and that was it. That's how I met her.
Alright. So, has your opinions changed about Vietnam, or has your opinions kind of stayed the same?
Well, my opinions have pretty much stayed the same. I think one of the things that changes in life, I mean, you've got, change is so important in all forms of your life. You never can stagnate. You never can stand still. You've got to keep changing, evolving, and that includes your philosophy, your religion. Everything evolves to a higher, hopefully a higher place. And for 20 years I was a Democrat, and I believed in the things that they believed in. When I came home from Vietnam, all my friends, everybody I knew, everybody was a liberal Democrat, and they all the kids at college were anti-war and all that, So I was kind of, and then they were really idiots. I mean, they treated guys like me pretty bad. So I didn't necessarily want to go out and tell everybody I had been in the Marine Corps. So I never really mentioned it much. I never told too many people. And then my mom and dad were Republicans, and my grandma and grandpa were Republicans. But I chose kind of to go with the libs for quite a while. And I voted, first time I voted against Richard Nixon. I voted for Eugene McCarthy, and over in Vietnam. That was the first time I voted. And I kept that, that there again, you evolve, and they say that, they say that, I'm not giving you any ideas here, but they say that children or young people are always Democrats because they have a heart. They think that the heart they're ruled by their heart and their emotions. When you become older, you become responsible. You have your own children, your own families, your own life. You all at once you realize that there are many things that are more important than you, and you become, when you get married, you usually put your wife first, you second, and your dog third. That's the way it works. You have kids, the kids become first, your wife or your spouse becomes second, and you become third. And as you grow older, your politics works the same way.
Mm-hmm.
It Once you understand, I mean, one of the things that hurts more than anything that I can think of is, you watch the stuff that's going on with this Trump and Clinton, and you watch, you think people that believe in Clinton and the liberals are so convinced that the Republicans are the ones that have the hard hearts, but actually, in actuality, they give more money to charities, they give more, churches do a huge amount of good works, and that all that stuff, and it's just more, and what the problem, one of the biggest things that I hate worse than anything is, and I learned a great lesson. I had a grandmother who was full-blooded Cherokee on a reservation, and I'd go see her every once in a while. She'd come and see me, and what happened was that the white man, the Western civilization, stole their pride and their free will by giving them, you got all this land, you can do anything you want, build anything you want, we'll give you the material to do it, and we'll give you the money, we'll take care of you, feed you, and that's what they did. They gave it to them. Well, when people start receiving stuff and it's given to them, that person that's giving it to them owns their soul, their pride.
Mm-hmm.
And pretty soon, once they realize that I have no pride, and that's what's happened in the politics now, where certain people have lost their pride, and they owe it to the Democrats for whatever. It's for welfare or
Mm-hmm.
food stamps or whatever. They're where they live, all the things, and instead of being a person that can go out and get that for yourself and go out and take those things from this capitalist society we live in, you can take them for yourself, which gives you a huge amount of pride. That's what makes you who you are.
Mm-hmm.
When you achieve something on your own that's not given to you, man, that makes you feel great. I mean, it's just like sports,
Mm-hmm.
When you go out there on that, nobody's there but you, and you've got to shoot that or throw that ball, or you've got to hit that, you got to do it on your own. And the pride that it gives you is not just for your mom and dad or for your classmates or fellow athletes. It gives you something. It makes
Mm-hmm.
you feel proud inside that I did that, And that's the kind of pride that you want throughout your whole life. And so that's one of the things that I'm adamant about, is I want to feel it.
Well, thank you so much for doing this with me.
You bet.